Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Band Together. We just want to give you a quick disclaimer that before you go into this week's episode, we had a little bit of a microphone situation. Hopefully, the content is good enough that you guys don't notice it after a few minutes. We listened to it and we loved it enough to put it out nonetheless. So enjoy.
Freedom, freedom over fame. Freedom over cycle stays the same.
Back there, my band baddies. Oh, my band babes. That's what I was.
I thought it was bandits.
It's when Teresa came out last time, she liked band babes. Adri likes bandits.
I do like it.
I am still experimenting. Is
Yeah,
what
that's
Teresa
the one.
liked. Band baddies is the
I
one
like
that Teresa.
bandits.
You like?
Bandits.
It feels criminal.
Yes, that's what I was gonna say. It goes with the theme.
Does it?
Yeah.
Do you resonate with criminal activity?
I resonate with the fact that these are banned books
and that is
criminal.
No, smooth criminal.
I get it.
This week we are reviewing a really fun book and I feel like she packed a lot of content into such a short book, but it's The House on Mango Street. And I'm going to let you know right now, I call mongos because I was corrected in a very specific environment and story. We have a lovely special guest today. Her name is Andrea, and she is Adri's cousin.
It's Julia Andrea.
Julia Andrea. Anyone's here?
We can.
We definitely can.
Always, yeah.
Okay.
I haven't, but go for it.
Okay, so Julia Andrea, pronoun she, her, ella.
Adriana Lopez, she, her. I never get to say my name like that.
No, I love it.
I love
it. And then Gina Macrina, she, her. Mine was way less enthusiastic.
Yeah.
You're all, do you need a they, them? Will that bring the enthusiasm up? Yeah, The House on Mango Street. And Adri, will you tell us a little bit the basics about the book?
So The House on I'm Mexican, but I still say Mango Street. Was published in 1984 by Mexican-American author Sandra Cisneros, and it is the story of a young girl, and it's published as vignettes of little tidbits of her life as she's growing up in the suburbs of Chicago. So, yeah.
And I believe it was all taking place in one summer. Is that correct? That's what I've got.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
It feels like it. There's not like
Yeah.
a lot of timeline specificity.
Yeah. When I was looking at some of the details of the book, what was written down was that these are all supposed to be things that occurred over one summer.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it says. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, or a year in her life.
Mm-hmm.
A span of her
Mm-hmm.
year.
Now, my first take on the book, to all of our readers and listeners and some of our dyslexic people out there, if you're taking my advice and listening to the audiobook along with...
Don't.
Yeah,
That's
so
really hard.
we had a busy week and I was only able to listen to this book at first with audio, and the way that it's narrated is a little difficult to follow. So I would definitely encourage you there's a lot more weight to it if you just read it. Just get down and dirty and open the pages and flip through them.
And it was Andrea who pointed that out to me because we were both telling her how difficult it was to fall in love with it. And she was like, get the book. And once I did, it was a game changer.
Yeah, because I had a similar experience where the audiobook went through it, got distracted while listening to it, but when I was actually reading it, it was really helpful to share about the dyslexic experience. But for me, I take a really long time to read books.
Mm-hmm.
But
Really?
this book was a really fast read for me.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah,
because I really resonated with it, but also really short stories, which made it seem like I was getting through pages a lot faster.
And it's like really satisfying. There's
Yes.
something really satisfying in your mind where you're like, ooh, I got through another one.
Yeah, 10 pages, 5 minutes?
Wow.
Yes.
Who is she? I know her. Yeah, so definitely encouraged to, if you have the means, just read it outright. It's a lot easier to follow, and it gets a lot closer to your heart because it is a banned book, and I think first takeaway is I don't know why.
Yeah. It was it was one of the first things I thought about once I actually finished it. I was like, I maybe can think of one or two things that were quote unquote problematic, but even then, I find it really hard to find a standing on how to ban this book.
I am sometimes a pessimist, so I feel like I'm
I
like,
love it.
of course you would ban this book. You know what I mean?
So why? Okay,
All right,
so why
tell
did
me.
you think?
Yeah.
Well,
because I was reading it, I'm looking for why. Why would you think?
I felt seen as a person of color, as a Latina in this book, so of course it would be banned.
Lived
I feel
experience.
like, I don't know, I feel like I'm such a pessimist in the sense that I feel often very suffocated by society and often like shut down. That when really reading a book that I felt so like closely like really told my experience growing up, that I was like, it's no surprise to me that you would really ban a book that does this, because you really like trying to silence those experiences, right?
Yeah.
Like
Right.
not wanting others to really acknowledge that there are other experiences, other ways that people live, and that don't really necessarily align with what white standards are.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really good way to put it, because there were parts of the book that when I was reading it, it almost feels like looking into a memory where you're like, oh, I remember something like that, or you're like, oh, someone put that down in writing.
Yeah.
How fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Or you knew someone, like a friend who's been through that, or more so also, I could see that happening in my neighborhood, or that probably happened here.
Yeah, yeah.
So when you say been through that, can you give me an example?
Oh, there's a lot.
There's so many. The easiest one is the chunkless.
Oh, okay,
Easiest
speak more on that.
easiest-
'cause I maybe
easiest
don't
one for
remember that
me.
story.
Because I grew up trying to, and I said this last week, but I grew up trying to hide my Hispanic culture a lot. I really embraced being whitewashed, and I really leaned into that, and it hasn't been until the later years of my life where she's talking about her shoes though, and she's basically saying how she was dancing, but she was just so embarrassed by the brown and white shoes that she had on. And I remember, because we would go to Mexico every summer as a family, and my mom would always try to buy me like, because they're not cheap, like leather, like chanclas essentially, but like leather made shoes are not like cheap shoes. And so people really hold them in high regard, and I was like, I want Adidas. You know what I mean? She talks about how she would get them at the beginning of the year because they would last her a long time, and she was like, they do, but they're not cool. Just these little unwritten parts of your psyche that you tuck away and don't remember until you read them.
Yeah.
Until something triggers the memory. So go ahead, Andre.
Me? Oh, which one resonated with me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I found it. The one that resonated really with me of all the stories that are in this book is Those Who Don't. And I feel like this is something that now as an adult, I see a little bit more, maybe not as a kid, because I grew up really in a neighborhood where everyone looked like me. In this one, just even like the opening line is, those who don't know any better come into our neighborhood scared. They think we're dangerous. They think we will attack them with shiny knives. And then it ends on really talking about that all around we are safe, but watch us drive into a neighborhood of another color, and our knees go shakety shake, and our car windows get rolled up tight, and our eyes look straight. So that's how it goes. I feel like I really related with the content of that story, but then also just that last line of that's how it goes, right?
Yeah.
That's just like our, in a sense, acceptance of that's how it goes. Like people come in here, and for how many efforts we really try to go through to ensure that those see the Mexican community or the Latino community as a culture that is to be appreciated just like any other culture. It often is not. So yeah, I really related to that one. I don't know, people feeling scared of going down that street, but I'm not scared. Is there really anything to be scared of other than whatever your unconscious biases are about people?
Totally, yeah. I think in adulthood now I can appreciate so much more going into a neighborhood that has an elote man, and they have raspados and things like that, where I think historically speaking that sometimes people look at that and they're like, it's like a monka in that neighborhood. Really, I just feel like there's a lot of culture that people don't appreciate, and a lot of, to me, at least my perception of when I think about the white American dream, it's like a white picket fence, it's like a really pretty house, it's a manicured lawn, and there's bigger streets and more space. but there lacks so much culture in that, where you get to see that when you go into more Hispanic and different neighborhoods of different color. And I didn't see the beauty in that until I got older, and I was in those spaces of whiteness that I was like, something feels like it's empty and missing.
Yeah, and even then, just those neighborhoods to me feel like home, right? Everyone around me looks like me, and it feels like home. And other places where others don't look like me, or even maybe are not of the same complexion as me, aren't easily made to feel as home. But I've had a lot of friends who like have experienced either going away to a different state or interacting with others who they're able to really listen to their perspective of that state and the different communities. And often they're told, oh, that street, like, don't go down that street, right?
Yeah.
Say like they're like in, I don't know, like Kentucky or something. And it was always like, don't go that street. It's so dangerous. It's so ghetto. But they go down that street and this is my home though. This feels like home. It's not really ghetto. So it's really so crazy to see the perspective of others is what they see as dangerous.
Right.
When there's no.
Even like going to parts of Mexico. Like even I mean, I know the cartels are like a thing and it's dangerous, but like even being and existing in places TJ where we have family who lives in TJ, and we like Malena, and we've gone and taken her and stuff, and some people would say that the areas that we're in are dangerous, but really I think they're okay. They're just not American traditional streets.
Yeah, and I think that of course there's a level of danger, right? Wherever you travel,
right,
you're at alert. You're not home. You don't know where the safe spots are, where your house is at, or anything like that. But I think that there's really that fear from people who have really like negative biases against people of color, that it's like something's going to happen to you specifically, and someone's going to come and attack you.
Yes,
right. And
that
it's
just
not
reminded me of, who was it? Was it John Mulaney? Or what's his name, Birbiglia or whatever. It was some comedian a couple years ago made a joke, and I remember thinking it was fucking hilarious because it was true for white people. He's white. And he was like, I was traveling through the road. I'm doing stand-up and going through these like different towns. And he was like, and then when you get stuck in like a weird part of town, he was like, you know what I always do? I put in my GPS where to get to a Starbucks. Because once I get to a Starbucks, I see all the white people and I feel safe. And that's a joke, and everyone was like laughing, and I'm like, yeah, it's funny, but it's because it's his proximity to whiteness, or his just wanting to be back in a white neighborhood. And he was like, get to the Starbucks, because then the Starbucks is where all the white people are at, and then I'm safe.
Yeah, that has a lot to do, I think, with white people seeking out familiarity. Yeah, is that good?
That's
like,
a word.
Sometimes when you say words out loud, they don't. Anyway, they don't connect. They don't sound right for some reason, like fork. But I do think orange. She asked me how to spell orange.
That's right.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that most races or most communities do feel most comfortable within themselves. But white people take it to extremes, to the sense that I feel like some of us will look at a street like that, or a tamale man, or somebody selling frutas on the side of the road, and be put off by it. But if you're within that community even a little bit, you know, that's the spot. Like, and to the same turn, I don't see any of us white people going to set up hamburger stands on the side of the corner. Like, I would never buy a hamburger by some random white guy, but I will always buy like a tamale or some frutas from just any Hispanic person selling them off the street, because that's just, it does have a certain nuance. It does have especially living in the LA area now for as long as I have. When I go to other places, or when I go up north now, those things are absent and I miss them. Like it, and
or you know where I'm going, I think.
So.
Or when we went up north together, and you had a friend who was like talking about the bad part of town, and it was just fruit stands were around, and there was like taco stands, and I'm like, this is where we eat.
Yeah.
Like, we're not scared. We went to a food truck, and she was like, no, we take our food and we take it home. And I'm like, no, let's just sit at the table here.
Yeah.
No one's gonna hurt you here.
Yeah.
Oh no, that in that specific case, that was bad.
Was it?
It
didn't feel bad.
We were in dead center of the most rundown part of Vallejo, where people get shot all the time.
I didn't feel scared though.
No, it's nothing to be scared of. I have a lot of great friends that come out of living in Vallejo, but it's not a place for somebody to hang out.
Right.
And actually, I really want to jump into that feeling of feeling uneasy and going back to those who we all feel safer within our community.
Mm-hmm.
But then also there's just the fact that people of color feel safer within each other versus in white spaces, but the why, right?
Mm-hmm.
When white people feel uncomfortable in brown spaces or in spaces with minorities, what's the why and which one really actually carries a danger, a true danger that has been shown in society where you can really lose your life in these spaces, right? So I think that really digging deep as to why do you feel a danger in these spaces? Is it because you're uncomfortable with just your ideas of what happens in communities of color? Or is it because maybe you are actually in physical danger, right? If we think about it, me as like a brown person and I go somewhere where it's like all white people and maybe there's a history of racism in there, right? I'm going to be scared because I'm going to get shot or I'm going to get beat up or something.
Or the cops are going to get called.
And then white person going around a community, not in this example that you were saying about maybe like people get shot there in general, but just a community like that looks like ours and they feel like it's a little bit dangerous, but why?
Maybe that's why I felt triggered by that. I didn't feel in danger. There was nothing to indicate to me that we were in true danger. And maybe I'm not familiar with Northern California. I didn't even know that Northern California was conservative. So that's on me for
some spots are, not the whole thing. Obviously, we have San Francisco.
Yeah, that's on me for being uneducated. But I didn't feel uneasy. But you're right. There was some validity to it. But I remember feeling like a little, I don't think it was in the shoe.
Because I think
I felt like they were uncomfortable
because of their racial bias.
Yes. And which is what tends to happen. That I feel like the example that you all are saying is less often that happens, right? But the majority of the time,
and
what happens?
And maybe it's on me to look up the statistics of that particular town and the crime rate in that town, because again, how true is it, and how often are people really getting shot right there on that corner that we were on?
Because the majority of the time it's more so like you feel uncomfortable because people don't look like you, and what through like just generations within your family, within your community has been said about people of color. And why do you feel like?
And I get really triggered when people call certain spaces ghetto. Yes. And that was being said a lot.
Unless it's Earth specifically, and then we know that Earth.
No, I call Earth ghetto all the time. Earth as
I feel like the word ghetto really carries some form of judgment, right? If I call my community ghetto, I feel like also it's not necessarily right. I think like it's my community. I'm going to call it ghetto, and if I do, but I don't.
It's like when you have a sibling and you're like, you're a bitch, but I would never actually call. I would never call my sister a bitch.
No, but it is a thing where it's true with my family. I'm like, I can yell at them until I don't call people names in general. I can yell at them. I can be mad at them. I can say what I want to them. But if somebody else comes along and does it, now we've got a problem. And that's a community reflection. It's okay. You're not even from here. You don't even know what's going on with this community. You don't get to judge it.
Exactly. Because when it's someone who isn't aware, just as a family member calling someone in your family like a name, it comes from at a place of judgment versus just like I'm just like joking around in this case, right? The weight of the words don't really carry the same meaning as the actual word. It's like if I call my town ghetto, I'm not actually saying what the definition of it being ghetto is versus if someone comes into this community and does, it carries a lot more, and maybe you truly feel it. This is your perception of the space that you're currently in.
Yeah, it is absolutely true. Though in this situation, this is only me coming from somebody who is from there and knows that space was not the safest, and
she's on. No, you were.
You're in danger, girl.
Yeah, but I think you really just speak to overall, right? Like people who do this.
In most cases, it's a situation where they're just unfamiliar, and because statistically, in minority-led neighborhoods, there is less money, and so since there's a little bit more poverty in some of those neighborhoods, statistically, but not all, I think a lot of people, a certain group of white people will judge that, call it ghetto, when in actuality, they're just people living differently most of the time.
Yeah. And that's why it really makes me mad that they like ban these books, because I feel like there's a really big trend of the white community not allowing or not teaching their kids to be critical thinkers of why even the communities have been in poverty, right? Why do commonly you see Hispanic men go into like gangs? Why do they sell drugs? Why do black men sell drugs? Why do women of color get into selling drugs, doing all these crimes? It's like all a societal situation versus it just being because you're Mexican, because you're black, because you're whatever.
Right.
Yes, thank you. It's not, it's like there's a perception of, oh, it's in your DNA. No, bitch, it's socially conditioned to be in a place that is impoverished so the police doesn't come. There's a reason why rappers talk about, oh, he showed up like they're in a white neighborhood, like it was Kendrick Lamar who said that. Because we don't have the same safety nets or protections or social ladders to climb, historically speaking, and our families have been really lucky. Both Andrea's parents and my parents were immigrants, and we've both been able to do pretty decent things in our life, and it's because of their sacrifice. But what people don't realize, and I don't think this gets talked about often enough, what people don't realize is that when you have immigrant parents, they don't encourage crime. They don't encourage anything that's outside of the American dream. If anything, they are more proponents and more encouraging of that white American dream because they're trying to assimilate to a country that is not theirs, to where they don't know the language, they can't read it, and they just see the image of what is success in this country. And if anything, they're trying to push you into more, and I almost caught myself saying like the clean grow aesthetic, but not like the clean grow aesthetic. They're pushing you towards better. And better doesn't mean go sell drugs, go do this, go get pregnant, go, like they don't want that. So all of these statistics of how this happens, it isn't because it's encouraged within our community, it's because most of the people in our communities are impoverished and they're doing what they need to do to get by.
And their opinion of better is also objective of their desire to feel at home in a country that doesn't celebrate them being there. So the way that their kids are really going to fit in is to look or to follow more of a white lifestyle. So that's why we were pushed that as kids, right? To do better, go to school, get a better paying job and all of that, because that's
and
how...
And it's always get out of here.
And I think going back to the whole thing of the statistics of crimes, and that's why white people often feel uncomfortable in these spaces, I think that just in general really makes me upset, because you just fall back on these statistics without really thinking about the individual and the humanity in these people, right? Do you think people want to go to jail? Or do people want to sell drugs and not have a lot of money to make a living? No. So really taking a step back, and instead of saying, oh, okay, I guess sometimes you might still feel uncomfortable in a space, but more so leaning with it of a empathetic view of, yes, there's crime in there, but damn, that also sucks that there is crime there. Not necessarily like those people are less than because of that.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think that when I did work with Surge, which for people who don't know, that's Stand Up for Racial Justice, it's abundantly clear, and that kind of also makes a lateral move into our prisons being packed with 70% African American people, and then you've got also Latinos mixed in there, and then you've got white people like on the ass end of that. But if you're growing up in that neighborhood, and there's different levels, like I understand what you're saying, Andrea, about going into a neighborhood and being white and having prejudice about that neighborhood, because some of those neighborhoods are not even impoverished and white people are still scared. But also, if you're going into a neighborhood that is one of those statistics where there is a lot of impoverished people, there's a lack of opportunity because of the opportunities that are not equally given to people of color. And that's when you grow up in that neighborhood, and let's say you need to make rent, and let's say, unfortunately, you're coming from a single parent home, so you've got maybe your mom working 2 jobs, and she can't do anymore. Her time is not her own. She's got maybe several kids going, and you just want to make a name for yourself. The closest opportunity that you have and the most money that you can make is by perhaps, or maybe it is just the safest thing for you to do, is to become a part of a gang, because there are some fighting situations there's rival gangs. So it might just be safe. It might just be an issue of needing to help out with rent, and that might fall on your shoulders at the age of 14.
Yeah. I can speak on that because my brother and sister did start working young to help my parents. And I think we've talked about this. So I cheered when I was in high school, but my parents didn't pay for shit because they couldn't. And that was expensive. And the way that I did it is because my brother and sister paid for it for me. And they didn't do it by paying. My sister worked at a fucking juice bar.
I think the same juice bar that my mom worked at.
It was!
Yeah, it
was. That's cute.
Yeah. That's funny. And I don't know. I know we keep saying statistics, but the statistics show that 62% of the recipients of SNAP food stamps are white.
A lot of people don't realize that.
Yeah. And then there was a TikTok that went viral this last week, and it was this girl who was like, look at what my Target looks like, and all the beauty products were behind a glass case, and everyone was stitching it, and it's like, bitch, do you not realize white people steal too? Yeah. Like, the perception is that whiteness means no crime and shit like that, but it's not. As someone who has worked in retail, I was taught to almost exclusively look for the middle-aged white women to be stealing because they have their whiteness to protect them, and they assume that they're not going to get caught, and those are the people that are honestly stealing more often than not.
Yeah.
And yet, the people of color, and it happened in my own store, one of the other managers followed someone around, and I had to be like, listen, calm down, because that person came and talked to me, and I had to deal with it. And it's really not the people. I'm not saying that people of color don't steal. I'm just saying that the statistics aren't really supporting the fear that is just ingrained in not all white people, but even within communities of color, to have colorism towards whiteness. Because even in our family, like I think I've said this story before, but my sister's nickname is Negra. Which is, it's sweet and endearing. Like, we've talked about nicknames and stuff before, but it means that she's darker. And typically, lighter complected people are considered more beautiful because we've been conditioned to think that within our own communities too.
Yeah, I was actually surprised to know that, and that is a new thing that I found out when dating you. That within the Hispanic community, some people view darker complexions as not being as good as lighter complexion.
Yeah, or something to be called out, right? Well, of course, we still have our cousin, and I'm sure so does the rest of our family. And my sister also has a nickname that really just speaks to... The nickname doesn't matter, but I feel like that it really just... In Spanish, in Mexican culture, really just really speak, these nicknames aren't endearing. And oftentimes, and this is just going to be maybe not really related to the story, but
do you want to know what my nickname is?
Well, okay, if you think about it like this, though, that nicknames that Mexican, I will speak to the Mexican community because I'm Mexican, but Mexicans tend to make up nicknames for their family members that really talk to their appearances. Right? Talking about how they're short, how they're darker, how they're like really skinny. In whatever way you get a nickname that like speaks to your appearance. And yes, that's horrible, but also if you think about it, why? Like, why are those created? And while it sucks and while I put a lot of judgment on my family sometimes for doing these nicknames, I'm like, have a little bit more empathy. But I also really I lean on emotional intelligence of racially. This has been created, and this whole idea of needing to look a certain way is because of whiteness being celebrated, right? So while it's horrible that these nicknames are being done, you're not a horrible person for all of a sudden like giving this nickname to me. It's more so just because communities often feel so suppressed by white communities, and they dream of their kids, of themselves being able to fit into those molds.
They literally dream of that.
Yeah.
Even her story, even Esperanza, at the end going, my little house, my little casita. Like, we are all dreaming of belonging.
Yeah. I feel like I've also fallen victim to that. When I think of where I want to live, where I want to buy a house, right? I think of, I don't know if you all have seen like Sweet Magnolias, the show. It's all like Gilmore Girls, right? A little small town where everyone knows each other, but everyone's white. So my partner and I recently went to Ojai, and that was the first time we ever were in a really small town where everyone is white, but it really looks like where I want to live. Where I want to like grow a family, go to these little boutiques, go to the farmer's market and all that. And it's, as a person of color, having been also taught to dream of these spaces, dream of belonging in these spaces, it's also unattainable. It's such a harsh reality and to come to really be sitting in this space when we were on that vacation and really realize that everything that I've dreamed of, I don't fit in. And it made me so emotional having this conversation with my partner too, that all of my dreams, even if I make it, right, like even of all of these barriers, like financially, everything, if I'm able to overcome all the barriers already, like society places on me, if I get there, I still won't belong. I will not feel comfortable in that space because of how I look. And it's also a lot of dismantling that dream. And really, and it really speaks to this book too, because at the end, it really touches on, and I highlighted these lines because it literally reminded me of that moment. That, what is it, right? Mango Street says goodbye sometimes, is the last story, but really saying that one day I will say goodbye to Mango. I'm too strong for it to really keep me here. So wanting to really leave the space, wanting to leave my community, but really where it feels like home is my community. People that look like me. And then the book says, they will not know I have gone away to come back for the ones that can't leave. And I think that's why too, it's like really upsetting to have this book be banned because I had to learn that on my own and go through the harsh reality that even though for my entire life I've been wanting to leave these communities or having just a vision of not necessarily wanting to leave, right? I don't have a negative experience in my community, but more so having a dream of what I want my home to look like, what my community, what I want that to look like. But then also not having learned growing up that those spaces I don't belong in. And at the end of the day, like I'm going to really get to an appreciation of my own home, which is what happened to me. I went to UCSD, left my community, and during that whole time in high school, I was like, I just want to leave here. There's nothing to do. There's nothing here for me. Went to school, worked there for a little bit. COVID brought me back, but then I had to go back to work. So I was in San Diego for the past 2 years, but a total of almost 10 years. And it really hit the point where I'm living, paying so much rent, can't do it financially, it just doesn't make any sense. So I'm gonna come back. But now that I'm back in my community, it more so feels like I'm home. I have love around me. I have like others who see me for who I am. And that is something that would have been nice to know if I would have read this book. Or also others. I
don't think you would have captured that.
Maybe not, right? But other people of color that find themselves in these communities where they don't fit in. There are people like us who eventually then make it into these white communities and you raise your kids with white people in more affluent neighborhoods, but then their kids don't fit in, right? So really, and probably in those neighborhoods, that's where these books are at, right? In more affluent
it's like
neighborhoods.
Arizona. So one of the reasons, I'll get to why it's banned a little bit later because
and these books are banned there. And you're really not able to see the experience that others go through of also not feeling at home in a place. While maybe you're in a little Mexican girl in an affluent neighborhood because your parents were able to get you there, you don't feel at home. But then also society, even me as a brown person in a Mexican dominant community, doesn't feel at home there. And it's just so hard to find a space where I belong.
I think you said that beautifully. I too have found myself coming back home. And Jeanna's gotten a lot of firsthand experience of what that's been like for me because I did live in an affluent, like, white neighborhood, and I felt, and that's the story that I was joking and telling you and Christina, it's very specific why I was unhappy in that home, and it has some to do with the whiteness and some to do with the relationship I was in, but I didn't feel at home there. I always felt like my memories of living in certain parts of Chino Hills, it's just everything felt really cold. Everything felt a little sterile. And I moved to the Ontario area about almost 3 years now. And I remember when I moved into these apartments, this is the least white neighborhood I've lived in since I've moved out from my family's house. And I was excited that there was a elote man that would come around. And then at the time, there was also a taco stand that was on the corner, like by where the Carl's Jr.'s at. And just little bits and pieces that I was like, oh, this is nice. This feels somewhat comforting. And then also, as I've gotten older, starting to cook more traditional meals and starting to go back to the things that make me feel hugged inside. Because it's true. Because even though I occupied that space for a long time, I didn't feel like myself, just down to the fact that to this day, people call me Adrian. Because literally, I tried it, and people don't say my name the way they're supposed to say it. So you just give up, and you just go, okay, my name's Adrian, instead of Adriana, or Adris, Or, and I was just telling her a story about someone that I work with that has started to say Atris the same way that my family would say it, and there's something so comforting where we can acknowledge each other in that way. And
it's like family.
It's like family, because only family can call me that, because only family can even acknowledge us to say it that way. Yeah, I think I wouldn't have absorbed it the way I do now, looking back on my life and seeing how much of myself I stripped away to blend in, only to in my 30s be like, I miss so many parts of who I am.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
And thank you guys for both sharing that. I can tell that's actually a really emotional subject. And from somebody who also has been a bit of a traveler, I can't speak on it the same way that you guys can as far as the culture goes, but I do know what it's like to try to find a home and not really feel like where you're living is where it's at. But I know that subject specifically can be very emotional. What do you think the answer is? Because I would love to see, I know where Adri's family lives. And does your family live around the same area?
No. Oh, no, La Puente.
Okay, so you're in La Puente. Okay. So a part of me is, let's get more color in the uncomfortable neighborhoods and let's actually make them assimilate to other people's cultures. But the forerunners of that conquest are going to hit so many barriers, probably have to deal with a lot of bullshit. And then the other part of me is, okay, let's feed money into the communities that need it the most so that they can rise. So you can actually be like, yeah, this is a place I want to like stake down and make a better place. The only problem with that is that currently in the society that we're living in, the people don't understand that the neighborhoods were actually built to be impoverished. It's literally geographically, structurally engineered to have these areas have less income. So how do you fight against something like that?
Yeah. I feel like I don't like that question. Whenever I hear, not love you, Gina, but
It's all right.
I don't like that question because why are people of color the ones to have to find a solution? And while it's great we'll touch on what we think might be best to help mediate this, but because I would love to also dream of what can come, but I feel like that's also taking away ownership from what society in general and its adoption of white standards, and it's really taking away from their need to take ownership.
Yes. I think when you were formulating your question, my thought was the white people just have to fucking stop. Because they're...
Stop what?
Everything.
Just stop.
After formulating that question, the thing that came to my mind was, I'm born and raised in Southern California, but primarily the LA County area. And something that I've watched happen over the past decade or so is the city that I love, that I've cherished, that I've excitedly gone to my whole life is almost unrecognizable. And the parts that are left that feel culturally relevant to me are so run down, not taken care of, and just forgotten. And the spaces of the alley area that are flourishing are very white-centric. Mm-hmm. It's not about what can we do. It's, I think, and this is in a perfect world, and to Andrea's point, it is white people taking acknowledgement of their occupation and continual colonization of spaces that are not theirs to take. The city of Los Angeles is literally a Spanish named city, and yet we are prioritizing funding cities like Century City, and I don't know, I haven't been telling a hot minute because I just don't like going anymore. Mm-hmm. Because even Olivera Street is on the verge of closing down.
Because of that restaurant, right?
It's not just that restaurant. That's like a blip on the radar of just the fact that area that is historical just hasn't had funding. Mm-hmm. Even though it's right next to Union Station, which so many commuters are around. And how is it possible that being in the center of LA, that's a street that's on the verge of closing with Mexican vendors and history that is indigenous to this land? Mm-hmm. So I don't know that there's something that we can or can't do. I think we just have to fund across the board. Like, I'm not saying that white people don't have a space. That's not the solution either. But maybe an acknowledgement of them trying to take over and beautify areas. Maybe beautify them within the culture of the people that already live there.
Not gentrify.
Not gentrify. And there's a difference between gentrification and there's a difference between the fusions, because I've seen fusion spaces, and that to me hits home because I'm like, okay, I'm a millennial who's grown up, I'm American, I grew up in the United States, and I love to see fusions of like same as someone coming in and putting a fucking Chipotle where there was once a mom and pop taqueria.
Yeah,
that's the difference.
And also stop, like, the whole thing of gentrification, stop thinking you're making it better for yourself, right?
Yes, you're not
making it better, quote unquote, and then moving into the space because you're running people of color out.
Because
like
it's the new cool place to be.
Yeah,
well, it's the same thing that's happening in Mexico City right now, and nothing has brought me more joy than being on the side of TikTok where I get to see the Mexican people hating on the Americans that are coming and being like, learn our language.
Yeah, they're like, come back when you learn Spanish, which is probably
the audacity, the literal audacity of people to go to another country. I'm going to try to be as nice when I say this as I possibly can, because I'm in a space where I work with white people and they've said things to me that really irk me sometimes. But really, to try to say you love like a Taco Tuesday and not be your justification for you loving, oh no, I love Hispanic food. Like, no. Learn the culture of the things that you say you appreciate. Don't just love the margaritas.
Yeah, and that's because white people have definitely taken so much of your tradition. And I would like to talk about the clean girl aesthetic that you brought up earlier, because I don't think we see a lot of the global minority, which is white people, and we will take things that we like about other cultures, call them something else, and then they will be popular and they will be mainstreamed and they will whitewash it and they will kill it.
Yeah.
And then take credit for it and call it ours. And people so the clean girl aesthetic comes from
Black communities
and some Hispanic communities. They've taken that. They tried to take agua frescas like earlier this year, I think.
Yeah.
Take credit for that, and then some of us get really confused as to why that's really offensive, is because instead of calling it something else, you can just say, holy shit, I just learned that there's something out there in the Mexican community called agua frescas, and they called it spa water. So I found agua frescas, and they're beautiful, and they're from the Mexican community. And oh, look, here is a vendor that I went and got it from off of this street. Let's call it what it is, because you're completely trashing a whole culture. Let's get down to it. The reason why, for example, you guys have corn tortillas, things like that, it's because these are the things that were growing in Mexico and or the Los Angeles area before we came over and took it. And that's true of all cultures. Their food is derived from the environment that they live in. So taking basically centuries of a whole culture's way of learning how to live off the land, and then taking traditions and ceremonies and things like that, and to just wash away all of the meaning towards them, I hope that we can all understand that's extremely offensive.
Yeah. And you're also creating, like with that take of the spa water or whatever it is that you're taking this culture and something that was born within this culture and putting it in a place that is now unattainable by those people who created that space, right? So
that's a good point.
It's less accessible because of finances, right? And you're already then more perpetuating that system that some people of color are already dreaming for that, wanting to fit in and lean more towards like the whiteness. And you're already doing so much to differentiate it. So say they get to a space where now they can afford these new things, these new creations, go out to Taco Tuesday, drink these new agua frescas, but it doesn't feel like home.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. It really doesn't. That's really true, because even when people adopt it in their mainstream environment, it still doesn't feel quite right.
Yeah.
Okay, I do want to touch on why it was banned, because as we've already mentioned, there was one mention of sexual assault that I was like, okay, maybe as I was going through the book.
No, she didn't say anything.
She didn't say anything. That's the thing, is she didn't actually outright say anything. She truly just expressed her perspective and her experience and her wondering of why this was happening, but nothing was explicitly mentioned. So the reasons that this book has been banned were sexual content, strong language, mature themes, cultural and ethnic themes, which goes back to exactly what Andrea was saying, is like she saw herself and said, I mean, that's wrong, and challenges to traditional values.
Wait, the challenge to traditional views?
Values. So it says in some cases, challenges
to traditional values?
Yeah.
That's bullshit. Like,
Yeah.
what do you mean traditional values? Who's traditional values? White people?
Yeah.
So it's like
Exactly.
a challenge to your values. That's what I'm saying. There's a lack of critical thinking within conservative communities. There's just anything that questions your ideas, you're just going to stifle that, right?
You just ban it.
Yes. And it's so annoying because there's also always, and also that just critical thinking also is not encouraged in Mexican communities. So that's not saying that we're the biggest critical thinkers, right? There's a lot of generational trauma and emotional trauma with it. But I feel like the whole idea that people are missing, and those who are not emotionally intelligent or unwilling to really critical think, is that when you really critically think about these things, it's also, of course, yes, like really there's others explaining to you their view, but a part of critical thinking is also accepting where they're wrong. So while you might feel that these newer generations are like so always against going your views, it's because, yeah, they're critically thinking, but then there's also an ownership that we have to take whenever we're wrong, right?
Mhm.
And that is what those communities who ban these books aren't doing. They're not allowing their communities to critically think, to adopt new ideas, because that also comes with taking ownership of what they're doing wrong and what they have done
happened
wrong.
wrong. Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. So challenge the traditional views is annoyingly what sets the standard for these traditional views.
Some of the books that we've read so far, and that's essentially why we've made this podcast. It's okay, this is why they're saying it's banned. I guess we can maybe 3% see the perspective, but it's still wrong. This one, they're just saying the quiet part out loud. They're just going, no, it's just different.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't like different. We don't want our kids to know that there's different.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably makes you feel livid, I'm assuming, because it makes me feel all kinds of certain unhappy
really
feelings.
Confusing because All Boys Aren't Blue was sexually explicit. And we said it and we acknowledged it because it was shocking even to read it. And I was like, oh, this is really sexual. And Frank didn't make sense to me. The Handmaid's Tale, again, made sense to me because of the sexual content and just like the oppression. But I think it should be available to at least high school students for sure. But this one really just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. Again, the sexual assault is not explicit. It's alluded to at best. The strong language, the only thing that it can quote here is that she says the word asshole at some point. And I don't even remember that.
Mm-mm.
I don't remember hearing any strong language. Mature themes, sure, but really they're just life themes.
No, there's stronger verbiage I know we've said it before, but there's stronger verbiage in the Bible, and everybody's encouraging the shit out of their kids to read that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But you're talking about incest and violence, people getting stoned, all kinds of people like getting burned, whole civilizations getting washed away, but we can't read The House on Mongo Street?
And Esperanza is 12 in this, and there are 12-year-olds that are getting murdered. There are 12-year-olds that are getting assaulted. There are 12-year-olds that are experiencing more than this in the book and in life. It's a small snippet of mature themes, and I say that in quotations, that are keeping this book off the shelves for people of all ages to somewhat start to relate and to help them process the feelings that they're having as they move through life, because even in that, she's a writer and she's a poet and she's moving through her experience and trying to find who she is through her writing. And it's encouraging. It's demoralizing that something like this could be taken away. If she can get silent, if not just Sandra Cisneros, but if Esperanza, if her story is silenced, then they don't want to hear anything about us.
Yeah. Especially this book, like all of it was just stories about like how they live, interacting with their family members. And one thing that I do want to touch on, and maybe we can segue later, is it did touch on some of the traumatic experiences that people of color go through just in the Mexican experience, right? Machismo and all of that stuff.
Or gay marriage.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
But a lot of it was so beautiful. Just really, it's her learning how to appreciate her space.
Yes.
And how to appreciate her home where, again, right, it starts on talking about how her parents always said they used to live in a little flat. It then went on of her parents saying, we're going to get a home with a big yard. We're going to have this beautiful home.
What did I tell you?
And
that was every family.
Yes.
There's not a Hispanic, there's not a Mexican family in this world that you can, in the U.S. right now that you can find that didn't or still doesn't currently have that dream.
And kids who didn't, right? My parents always tell me, and I don't remember this, and maybe like it's just like unconscious. That's why I'm taking this into then searching for a home in the future. That the one thing that I always said is I used to live in apartments. I always want a yard or yard with like a swing set. Yeah. And I want a yard with a swing set. But it really talks on how those parents were already dreaming this up for their kids, and they weren't able to achieve that for her. They were able to get her a little small home that she, at that age of 12, and that's the whole book, is her learning to appreciate this little home and realizing that's a really tough situation to do, or a space to navigate, to really appreciate the home that you were able to afford and the life and the community that you were able to afford, because really that's it, right? Like,
how old were you when you guys moved into your house?
2001. I'm currently 27 and 20, so 22 years ago.
Okay.
So
you were really little.
Yeah, I was little.
The home that I call my family home at this point is my brother's house, because it's our family home. And we moved in there, I think, around the same time, because Julian had just been born, or was about to be born. And I remember, and this is going to sound like I was such a little asshole about it, but I remember when they told us, okay, we bought a house, and all of us are moving out of this apartment, we're going to go to this house, and I remember the first time I saw it, I was disappointed. And I've never said that to my brother, I've never said that to my family, but I remember being like, because in your head, you're like, oh, we're moving into a house, and it's going to be like a really pretty house with the shutters on the windows, and you've been there like 1,000 times. And his house is so cute, and I love it, and I wouldn't want anything different now. But at the time, I remember feeling disappointed because it wasn't the house that I imagined. That it's not the house that you see on TV. It's just not that neighborhood. And his neighborhood is super cute, and it stayed super cute, and he's put a lot of work into it. But I remember they also said it was their starter house, and it didn't become a starter house. It's their house.
It's their forever home.
It's their forever home.
Yeah.
And that early on, I was like, oof. It's these feelings that I didn't even want to acknowledge within myself. To have that memory come back of when I first saw that little house and being disappointed. Because it wasn't the house I was promised.
Yeah.
And no one promised it. No one outright promised me a 5-bedroom, 2-story.
Yeah. But what did you watch on TV that really... Yeah, because I was too young. I moved... Yeah. They moved us into this home. I was 5. My little brother had just been born. But I do have recollections of going and then like viewing homes, and there was this one house that we saw that had stairs in it. But it was trash. The people who were selling it, like, literally trash all over the place, but that's the one I wanted. That's the one I wanted because it had stairs.
You gotta have those stairs.
Yeah, and while I don't remember, like, that, any type of disappointment in moving into a new home, because I was so little, right? There's so much joy to find in life when you're, like, 5 years old. You have a yard to run around in. It's, like, a completely different space than a little 1-bedroom apartment. But I do remember when searching for a home, all of these ideas that I like, or these different things that you are looking for in a home, or that I wanted in a home, were all formulated from things that I saw on TV. And that is really ingrained as being the standard by white culture. If you think back to Native American communities, and then white people really coming in and forcing them to go to boarding homes and all of this, and even just taking their kids away from their families, was because, and I read this article, really touched on, a lot of times like kids were taken away from their homes and put into foster care, and the family members never saw these kids ever again because they had so many people living in their home, right? But that's, like, right now I live with my parents, I live with my siblings, and that is a standard in our life, right? It's community, it's normal. If you think back then to that situation with Native Americans, was very much so seen as not appropriate, not correct, and endangering kids, when really it's just different to you and not something that you've seen before. So now all of a sudden, it's dangerous. We're going to take your kids away. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, and it's, I think, really racist to think that way, because it's not just the Hispanic community that focuses more on family and will have either a revolving door or in a lot of cultures, children will just stay until they get married, or they'll just stay up until their adulthood in general. That's
or
the
until
norm.
they can afford something.
And yeah, which that's a whole situation in and of itself. But it is more encouraged in different cultures as to where, you know, we as white people, I think, not always, but for a lot of us, it's okay, as soon as you turn 18, you're out. Like, you need to go and grow. And coming back means that you've failed in some way.
Right.
But in a lot of cultures, it is just the standard, and it creates more of a community, and that's something to, I think, be valued. It's something to look up to.
And there's a lack of understanding, though, too, of when you see these families cohabitating in the same homes. There's a lack of understanding of, oh, that's weird that they're doing that. That's different to how my family did it, right? We don't do that. But also, why? Why do families have to do that? They have to live in one home because there's nothing to afford in the area. And who's the one who did that? White people literally have put up the prices of the homes in the area, and now all of a sudden we have to live together, but you're judging something that we're doing because you put it there.
Let me know if you can expand on this, because yes, my brother's property has like a decent backyard, and Jeanna and I are not making trash money, but we can't afford anything in this area. So I low-key joked, and I'm like, my sister lives in like their back house, and I'm like, I'm gonna just take that lawn, I'm gonna mow it right down, and I'm gonna just start building right there, because I'm gonna just live here. Where when I was younger, I remember also acknowledging that it was like weird that we all lived together and blah blah blah. But also, I remember thinking, and again, there's a lot of things, there's a lot of trauma, and there's a lot of toxicity within the Mexican culture. I'm not saying that's not true. However, when I was younger, and even now, we joke about how even after you turn 18, you're not like an adult in a Mexican household. You still, especially if you're still living at home, you're still going, I'm gonna be home by this time. And as we've gotten through the different generations, that's definitely loosened up quite a bit than it did even when my brother and sister were teenagers. But now I look at that slightly different, where I used to wish I had the freedom of my white friends, and now I feel loved and supported and cared for in a way that sometimes I don't think and I won't say just white people, like more families do, where they do kick their kids out at 18, or they're like, I'm cutting the cord, that's it, you're done here. And you don't get that. We don't get that. And that comes with the good and the bad. You know,
yeah, that's definitely sad, but really also like a lack of empathy there, right? A lack of empathy that's shown to other people of other cultures. You do that within your own family, you kick your kids out, and and then it's not surprising that you do that. You do that to people of color.
But even when I've had a relationship that went really bad and I didn't have a place to go, within a day, my brother took me in. And it was no questions asked. I never ever once questioned if I could come home. Because I would always have a home there.
Yeah, and for me, there's now like a deep-seated shame in me if I were to ever have to go back and stay with my mom. Like, logically, consciously, I'm like, shit happens, things can go down, and if you have a supportive family, that's great. But since I left home at 18, I have not been back, and I've stayed in my car like, if I needed to. And if roles were reversed and we were to have children and I had a daughter, because at the time I was staying in my car, I would think I did it up for a couple nights when and it was voluntary, but I wasn't impoverished or anything. I had a really good job. I just chose to save the money. But if roles were reversed and my kid had come to me and been like, hey, I'm struggling right now, I'm going to stay in my car, I'd be like, get your ass at home. What do you mean? You're not staying in the goddamn car. Absolutely not. And I'm not trying to victimize our culture in any way, shape, or form, but I'm saying that's not even an option in my mind. Because to my standard, if I go home, I've failed. Yeah. Like, I'm not succeeding in life. I should have a house with a picket fence right now. That's ingrained in myself very deeply. My uncle tried to get me to buy a house in 2007. If I would have followed his advice, I would have gone into bankruptcy. That's just not the America that we're in anymore. That kind of blurs into like society and culture and things like that, but that's always been present for the Hispanic community, is you're judged for being a certain way or like having a certain living situation, but also nobody's helping you up. There's no funds going, oh, hey, we see that you're struggling over there. Let's pump up your school so that your community can start to thrive.
Right.
Yeah. And also, too, our families, like, loving each other and, like, cohabitating is really ingrained in our culture. But if you, at least, like, in Mexico, all of my mother's family, they don't do that. They all have their own homes, right?
Yeah, it's a U.S.
Yeah, it's a U.S. thing because
U.S. specific.
I don't know if it's U.S. specific because I can't speak for any other families within Mexico, right? But none of my family in Mexico does that. Here, though, I feel also, well, yes, it's lovely that our parents are taking us in, our family members, but that's all they know to do, and that's what they know to do because they have an understanding of not having a home. They immigrated into this country and didn't have a home to live in. They struggled, and then eventually when they bought their home, that of course they're going to open their doors to everyone else because they can really empathize with someone in that situation. Yeah. And this book really touches on that, right? There was, I think, that Esperanza had a friend at one point, Kathy, was it? Kathy, I think? She touched on how her family, and they don't talk about Kathy's ethnicity or race or anything like that, but she touches on how they don't touch on it, yeah. And she moves out because more people of color are moving into the space,
Yes.
right? Going back to your question, Jeanna, of what can be done is such a tough question when if more people of color are able to move into a space, then that takes away white people. The white people leave, then resources are leaving, right? Because the government tends to really provide more resources for those communities that look like that. And then on the flip side, though, when white families move into spaces of color, gentrification, then those resources aren't really there to benefit the people of color.
Right. It just displaces the people of color.
So what is there to be done? Who the fuck?
I would say that it would be to give, at this point and right now, we're working off of systems that if, for example, and I do go back to schools because I think that the better the education in schools, ultimately the better the community will turn out to be in the coming years. And I think it has a really strong effect on community is when there's lack of funding in the schools, you can tell how much that state or that county values that particular community. So just as everything else within a capitalistic society, I think that throwing money at it is the answer. I think that if there's school systems that are having consistent lower grades, those school systems need the most money. I think that, and it shouldn't be something that is a gentrification. It should be just, okay, this community is struggling, they need more funding.
Or valuing people for their contribution.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Because even farm workers, we live in California, which is a lot of farm workers, and they don't get paid what they are due because their work is seen as low skill when it's not. It's essential to our sustainability, our access to food, and not just ours, but white people's as well. And yet they don't value the work that these communities are that they're contributing. We look at construction fields, we look at auto is now finally striking, but a lot of the people that I'm seeing striking for the auto industry are white too. So they're making strides and we're cheering for them, but we're not seeing strides from like farm workers or the construction industry.
No, we are. They just, only a couple months ago, the farmers had a big strike.
Oh yeah, they had like a walkout, but they didn't see the return on investment that.
No, and that's because, just like you said, the farmers are undervalued. We've taken food completely for granted, and we just think that it shows up. But in actuality, farming is a really hard line of work, and it's generational. I don't think that you can just walk in and become a farmer, and there's a lot of other things that branch out from that situation, because basically there's certain seeds that corporations went to go to court for, so that they have strict control on who has those seeds, so that nobody can use the example for corn. We've got Monsanto that are in the mix there, and they went, all right, you can be a farmer, but I own the seeds. And now
that's fucking weird.
These seeds are exclusively mine, And so your whole farming situation, I completely control. So even though these families have been farmers for generations, and that goes across the board, white, Hispanic, black, whoever, but for the most part, where you see a lot of farmers that are either Hispanic or white, and again, that's a generational situation. The companies have now come in, they've gained control of the seeds, and that's why you can't pick up certain seeds for certain goods, and that's because they're controlled by corporations.
That's really fucking weird.
It's really fucked up, and that's another control issue in my opinion.
Okay, so I would like to pivot, because something that we haven't talked about yet, and I really loved it, is her description and kind of neutral stance, but also admiring and also judging women in the book. Because even at the beginning, it's dedicated to the women, and there are certain, like she talks about the witch, I think it's her aunt, who's like a witch, and then just the way that women are talked about, or Rafaela, the one who drinks coconut juice and papaya juice on Tuesdays. Like, all of the women in this story, she's just observing their struggle, and she's highlighting women's struggle in the Hispanic community specifically, and in a way it feels like a love letter.
Like I see you.
Yeah. Yes.
It's because it is judgmental, but it's through the lens of just observing, and I felt it was really accurate for how we see women have these experiences, and even as my mom tells stories of her life, and that's how she talks about women.
I guess I wouldn't say judgmental. I feel like the only judgment that I saw that she put on these women is that she didn't want to be there, right? Which I think is just like a little bit more perspective-wise, like being able to acknowledge their experiences and like, I don't want to be there, but also really making them feel seen, where oftentimes in Hispanic culture, people who have these struggles or women are not seen in general. And even then, even more, women in these circumstances, in domestic violence circumstances, are not seen at all. And all of that is not acknowledged just because of the positionality that women really have within heterosexual relationships or Mexican relationships, right?
So, you shared an experience, or you shared a memory with me once, Adri, and you were talking about when your mom first came here and how it was like a weird tug of war between your dad and her brother, who were essentially fighting for her to serve them.
Yeah, having read the book, it makes me really emotional to think back on that, because what a hard place to be in. And you weren't around for this yet, but I think you're in your mom's belly in pictures in this house. But our uncle was the first one who came here, and they had a house. It's like the house that we all think of. And so they were considered super successful within our family, because they had like a 2-story house, and there's still pictures of the Christmases that they had, and ultimately they lost that house, and now they have a much more modest house. They've had successes, and all of their kids, one of them went to Pepperdine. Like, they've had successes, so I don't want to take that away from them. But my uncle is and continues to be very much Hispanic, and my dad was as well. My dad has since passed. And when my mom and my dad and my brother and sister came to this country, they lived in a back house that had no drywall, and it was just essentially just a shack, and that's where I was born into, on their property. And my mom tells a story, because she's now Jehovah's Witness, and she does not look upon the holidays fondly, because she remembers that tug that she felt with my uncle, both kind of demanding her to come over and make tamales and help his wife, and you should be doing this and you should be doing that and you should get a job. And she even remembers him getting her a job at a factory and her having to quit because my dad was pissed that she wasn't home to make food for him when he got home. And just the struggle of these two kind of paternal figures in her life that were pulling her in two different directions, and both really wanted her to be something, and she just was trying to survive and make a life for her kids, and
have a sense of self, and just an existential crisis, because when she lived in Mexico, she had her own home and her business and a yard and a cat, and she had to leave it all behind to come here because they told her it would be better, and she was living in a shack with no drywall. And just a complete shift of her whole life, and she still to this day says she lived better in Mexico. Now it's different. She lives with my brother, and they have a
beautiful home that they've invested money into. But it wasn't easy and it wasn't fun for her. And she was in definitely a very domestic violent situation. Let me backtrack that. She was in a situation with my dad where he was an alcoholic. He was emotionally, sexually, verbally abusive. And
I'm sorry, it's really hard.
I think one thing I will add is it's so hard to really work through the fact that not only was there partner violence, domestic violence on that end, but then also a lot of sense of control where she was not able to have a sense of self from a lot of people around her. And it's very hard to really compare that to what she had before, I think.
Yeah.
It's a tough thing.
yeah.
It seems like she's carried that to her even to this day.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like she really is more on a boat going down the stream rather than being the stream itself.
Last year, I've been really proud of her actually for how much emotional maturity she's had and growth and finding her voice. There was an incident recently that you know about where that same uncle spoke to her in a really sharp tone, and she finally set some boundaries for herself.
Mm-hmm.
She just turned 80 last week, and she's now setting down boundaries, and it's only because she's been out from under the thumb of control of a partner or a person like that.
From a man.
From a man, yeah.
Yeah, because I know that recently I've seen a lot of stories of women in Mexico marching and working on their independence. But unfortunately, just like any other culture, and this is also present in the white community, but I feel like a lot of violence does go into the Hispanic community against women.
Mm-hmm. It's always on us to mitigate how people see us,
mm-hmm.
even if it's our own family, even if it's a weird uncle. It's
right, like,
but then when you try to do that, you're being too much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, make sure you wear a shirt, your uncle's coming over. So it puts you very much in the place of ownership of your own assault.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's true.
And that's a mindfuck in and of itself. Instead of going, I'm not letting that uncle over.
Yeah, it's really having men take ownership for their own actions.
I have.
Which is
It's really bad though because I don't know if we never really talked about this, but I do remember I've always liked to wear shorts. Like that's just like a weird thing to say, but I just really have always liked shorts. And even into the last year, I'm in my 30s, my mom will be like, if she sees me in shorts, it's always on you to own your own body, and it feels so backwards because you're like, then don't look at me like that. And she has said that about like my brother-in-law. She's like, oh, pull your shirts down because so-and-so is going to be around. And I'm like, they shouldn't be looking at their fucking family. That's weird. That's weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's an interracial couple, like the husband's white, the wife is Puerto Rican, and he was telling me a story the other day that her family, his wife's family, she was assaulted by one of her uncles or cousins, it doesn't matter to me who it was, but a family member. And to this day, and I'm not trying to make him sound good, it's not about him, but he loves his wife, and to this day, if that individual is going to a family affair, he's basically, don't let me run into him. I'm going to shoot this guy. He's gross. He molested my wife. But nobody stops that uncle. Nobody stops that uncle from going to the family affairs unless this husband is there. Because they're not worried about their family, their daughter, their niece. They're not worried about her discomfort, even though they know that it happened.
Yeah.
They're worried about the conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And I see a lot of examples in this in a lot of cultures. One of my favorite books of all time, and we'll probably read it one day, is A Thousand Splendid Suns. And that has a lot of violence against women. And this book, in some aspects, did remind me of that book. And it's a way shorter book, The House on Mongo Street is, but there are a lot of similar tones in a few instances, especially the girl who was really pretty, and then she learned that boys responded to that, and then to escape her home, she got married young in 8th grade. And she got beat by her dad before, and then she got beat by her husband after she moved out.
men aren't held accountable
No.
in a lot of cultures
Mm-hmm.
and are seen as better than, that they know better, right? And
They can't
even,
control themselves. You have to.
Yeah.
It's always boys will be boys.
Uh-huh.
You have to control. They can't control themselves, and yet the other side of that coin is, okay, if they're so emotional that they can't make those decisions, why are they in positions of power?
yes.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and they have their cake and they eat it too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the one story that you pulled out about chanclas earlier, when you were talking about the chanclas and the idea of leather goods, I didn't see that story like that at all, though.
I completely skipped the part of the.
Yeah. So she talks about just this boy watching her dance. She's dancing with this boy, and at the end of it, the boy is her uncle.
Yes.
Yes. And her uncle is watching her dance the whole
Right.
time after they're done dancing together.
Yeah, it's
Very inappropriate.
I didn't even read it, but I didn't even register that part because it's.
And it's within family members. So
It's so normal.
and it's normalized.
Just in general, when men aren't held accountable, it tends to, fester, right? It spreads and it
Yes.
becomes okay within different communities and within different families.
And this is a situation that, much like how you were saying earlier on, I feel like this is a white people problem. I don't feel like it's up to me to necessarily fix it because we created, and I'm saying we as white people created this. I think this is a problem for men. I think it's a problem for men in the culture, especially because in Hispanic communities, men are generally head of household, and that's carried over internally, I think. It's up to them to be like, get the fuck out of here. Like, you don't get to be weird. You don't get to touch the women in my family like that and be welcomed in this household. And that's just, that crosses races, that crosses cultures. It's you, every single day you teach people how to treat you, and if you're too young to stand up for yourself, it's up to the people who are supposed to be caring for you to teach other people what's appropriate.
And I feel like it's never a situation where men make their families feel comfortable. It's more so men make the other men around them feel comfortable, right? That's what's prioritized versus really making their immediate family feel comfortable. Also speaking about it in a greater context like this book does. And really acknowledging that there are different women that are struggling in different experiences.
And the different ways that they're struggling.
Yes. There's a lot of stories in this book where either women are held in their houses, they can only invite people when they're, like, invite friends, right? Whenever their husbands are at work, having to then leave, escape their households because their father is abusive, but then end up marrying and at a really inappropriate young age. So I think that this book really spoke well to those situations that are often in the Hispanic or Latino culture very much so muffled down and hidden away because women don't have the power. So how are women, if they don't have the power, able to speak about their story?
And if you're raised to have a lack of resemblance of any natural bodily autonomy, how do you adapt it in your adulthood if nobody's ever taught you on a fundamental foundation level? That's hard, and I'm sure that's something that you guys have had to teach yourselves as adults.
And I think even like the one that I was thinking of was the Three Sisters, the story of the Three Sisters.
The little witchy ones?
Where they like the little witchy, and I think it's, I don't want to say cute, but I guess like cute that they're the ones that are happy and have ownership of their life. And it's really similar to today where people are like, oh, that she's a witch. But witchy doesn't mean bad today, but we were taught, especially because Hispanic culture is really ingrained, mostly in Catholic, in the Catholic religion, but we didn't experience that. It was Jehovah's Witness.
You guys didn't get the whole Catholicism bit.
No, but we got Jehovah's Witness, which is just as fun and good.
Right.
But they're the ones who are like empowered, and they're spoken of as kooky and alternative. And I think that's still, again, super accurate. The women that are empowered and have a bodily autonomy and have created like safety and community within other women are kooky, right?
Different.
Different, unorthodox to like, I guess.
Always, but then also too, always creating problems.
Yes. Yeah.
That's often been my experience, right?
Yeah.
Like
That's me.
me too. As someone who is I feel like I am very outspoken about my values. That is not necessarily taken as, it's not celebrated as, it's great that you have a strong sense of self. It's more so a challenge to.
You're challenging.
Yeah, you're difficult, you're challenged, you always have to bring bad vibes and all this stuff where.
Estás buscando problemas.
Yes, When more, I'm just trying to stand up for myself so you don't treat me like crap. What do you mean? I'm bringing problems.
Yeah.
I'm standing up for myself. Yes. And it's a lack of acknowledgement on whoever it is that you're having this conversation with, that what did you want to celebrate that these family members are able to stand up for themselves, just as, because I think that there's a lack of really taking ownership for anyone's actions, and especially like emotional intelligence sometimes with older generations in Mexican communities, that they celebrate their family members being strong and having successes, but when then that strength, or it's not even towards you, just a conversation or like trying to share with you some things that in a sense have to result in you having to take ownership for some of your actions, you're being difficult. But if it's outward, then it's celebrated.
Yeah. I agree 100%.
Yeah, I thought that seems, correct me if I'm wrong, that seems like a generational situation too. Like how would they have the bandwidth to acknowledge either their, if you want to call it, emotional abuse or negligence or what have you.
They have to acknowledge the abuse and the trauma they've endured themselves. They'd have to.
And that's the hardest part.
Yeah. They
So,
have to unpack it, and then they can empathize with the people who are calling it out as it's happening.
Right.
And that's such a difficult thing. And I think that I much so appreciate that I have been able to really build on my emotional intelligence to understand that. Because growing up in that environment, it very much so can feel like, oh, it's me, right? Versus now when the conversation tends to be like, it's still you from these people. I know it's not really me.
I know.
Yeah.
I know it's you, and it's not even you. It's your mother, right? It's your father. It's their mothers and fathers. So it's definitely generational.
Yeah.
But growing up helps, and being able to like really acknowledge emotional intelligence has helped with that piece. But it's because you have to acknowledge all of your traumas behind that, and that is such a difficult thing to do.
And that's a difficult, and even as older generations are becoming aware, I'm lucky in a sense that my mom, although she's resisted a lot of things, but she is at least acknowledging her resistance to the unpacking of the trauma. And I think without the pressure, because her and my dad separated a long time ago and she never had another relationship, I think that space has allowed her to start to process it. And even though she has never gone to therapy because she thinks she's too old for therapy and it's not going to help, but that space alone has allowed her to empathize with me and to see growth in me, and yet she still calls me difficult. So even in her acknowledgement of it, and even in her own way of processing her trauma, it's just so hard to decondition.
Yeah.
No, I think that you're completely right. And you and I have talked a lot about that you're being difficult situation, and that's got to be, because the one thing I will say for all the things that I went through, and this is me trying to relate to my own like mother-daughter situation, because I do think a lot of things come from the relationship with your mother, and I think that goes back to Freud and all kinds of stuff. But when you go to your parents, specifically your mother, and you're saying, hey, this is something that you did, it traumatized me, and you're asking them to basically go, if I traumatized you because I did this, then I was traumatized.
Yes.
And that's exactly what you guys were just saying. But that's probably people go to therapy for years before even being able to acknowledge that. And so then putting it off on, it's so much easier to be like, you're just being difficult. Why do you have to come rock this boat? And that gives you a whole different set of trauma that you then in turn have to unpack and be like, am I the problem? Am I the issue then? Like
you end up like really getting into this habit of gaslighting your own self. Because that's gaslighting. Your family members are gaslighting you, and then you are thinking about bringing this up, and it's very difficult to then be an advocate for yourself in any other situation.
Yes.
Because you're just being
Yes.
difficult. And
My
that's what
hands
that's really
literally
teaching
got sweaty
other
when you
people.
said gaslighting, because it led me to relationships in which I accepted gaslighting for a long time because I had heard my whole adolescence that I was difficult.
Mm-hmm.
I heard it to this, a couple weeks ago? It happens less,
It
for
happens
sure.
less.
And I'm more able, and I have more in my arsenal of emotional intelligence within myself to not take it on quite as much. But even through everything that I know, it's still super difficult to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In a lot of situations, and we're not here to talk about Adrian and I's relationship. That's not what our podcast is about. But since it does pertain, there have been situations where we will talk about arguments in our relationship, and she'll be like, I know that I'm difficult, and I know that I'm the problem, and I really have to, because I also dealt with a narcissistic personality as a mother, and I dealt with this a little bit, at a younger age. So I have to remind her, hey, it's not a you specific issue. It's okay for me to say sorry. This isn't a game of winning or losing.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's winning or losing. It's not, you're not being difficult. You're being yourself, and that's okay. And since we are in a relationship, it's never gonna be a just you situation. We've been together for 2+ years, and it's gotten much better, I think. But it's still there to where I have to be like, hey, you're not difficult. You're just a person having an experience, and it's clashing with my experience, and we have to figure out how to blend them. And that's it.
Yeah, I feel like I have OCD, so I have a lot of other things that I'm working through, but I feel like a part of it is OCD, and a part of it is the trauma of feeling like I need to overly apologize for myself. I apologize for saying that, I apologize for whatever it is, versus just more so apologizing for whatever it is, arguments getting to the way that they are, but acknowledging both. I feel like I have a hard time validating that what I said is okay, or valid, or my experience is valid because of that trauma.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I feel would be really cool, though, to really plug in here is that this is really just speaking to children of immigrants and even not immigrants, because I feel like this is just all generational trauma that continues even if you're not immigrants. But I feel like Adrian and I could just speak on the immigrant end because our parents were immigrants here.
I know what book you're going to go
Yes.
with. Yes.
The
adult children
of emotionally immature parents. Yes.
It's
Get
really
that
good.
book.
It's really good.
Yeah.
I really 10 out of 10 recommend. I haven't finished it. Did you?
Me either, no.
Okay.
But even just the first few chapters was helpful, and of course therapy. But while we're speaking on all of the traumas that have resulted in us being children of immigrant parents, and or in a broader scale, just emotionally immature parents, I feel like there's hope, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And this is also a really good thought that I had about this book, is that in the beginning of the one where it talks about names and her speaking on her name, I feel like oftentimes, because of a lot of the injustices that go on within the Mexican community and within just familial structures and all of that, Esperanza, which means hope in English, oftentimes is seen as a sad thing, right? Something that is really sad to have hope. But I think towards the end of the book really showed me that it really speaks on there being more than that, right? The word hope doesn't have to have a negative connotation to it or any type of sadness to it. There is growth that is often not seen, both in the emotional side when dealing with family members who aren't emotionally intelligent, so within the circle of Mexican families, but then also too, there is growth and hope that can be had when you're thinking about the experience of a Mexican or Latino or Hispanic individual within the greater society, and with dealing the injustices that are really placed there by white supremacist culture. So
Yeah.
I want to say something. I feel like we've touched on a lot of good pieces about this book, about just talking about the marginalization of, in this case of this book, so the House on Mango Street, of Latino families and communities, and then really went into the emotional trauma that can happen within those families. But one of the stories that really touched home for me is, it's called Papa Who Wakes Up Tired in the Dark.
Yes.
And I could cry just thinking about it. I feel like one thing that I'd really love to highlight is just like a celebration also of, while we touched on like men being in power in Mexican, or I keep saying Mexican because I'm Mexican, in Latino families, right? Their position is of power, and often that tends to be, certain men are not held accountable for their actions, for their lack of emotional intelligence within their families. One thing that does happen with both men and women, and I feel like it is a society thing, that they have to be hard workers. But one thing that I've just loved so much about the book was that story, the acknowledgement, being the type of dad to wake up in the middle of the night to go to work, right? And it was seen a lot in this book of men who just came here, worked, tried to make money, and there was other circumstances. I think it was like Gerardo, who with no last name, just an immigrant here, working hard in her neighborhood, trying to make a living, trying to do better for either their family here or their family in another country. That really spoke to me, spoke to my experience with that, my own father and also my own mother. And I think that while this book highlighted like the masculine, the man experience, talked about her dad, I do want to shout out like just women who immigrate here and have to work hard. Your mom, right? My mom did too, but I feel like you're really close to your mom, so your mom having to come here and really work hard. Both of our family members, or our parents, finding themselves in a tough space where the main thing that they can really lean on is that they were hard workers, right? Yes. Which is sad to think about, though, in some sense, that you and I are hard workers, and it's something that, yeah, it's part of our identity, but a big part of the immigrant identity is that they're hard workers.
As a rebuttal, thank you. As a rebuttal to people who say stricter border walls or stricter immigration laws and put up the border wall, then they can at least lean on the fact that they're hardworking. At least, I don't know, that's always been my interpretation, is that we overcompensate with our hard work for our...
Yeah, like the only value put on, not, I don't want to say the only as if it's factual, but sometimes politically or society-wise, the biggest attribute of the specifically Mexican culture would be, yeah, Mexicans work really hard.
Even when all of this has been happening in Florida, and to the point of your question, when that law went into place and people were going to TikTok to talk about it, you were like, look, the construction sites are empty, like they at least worked really hard. And it was almost like a joke when they would splice white people trying to do work that had predominantly been done by Mexicans. It's almost like a joke of like how shitty they did the job, and then how well and how efficient Mexican people are at doing it, or Hispanic people are at doing it. But yeah, it's because it's embedded.
Yeah. It's a little racist in that way.
It's a lot racist.
It's a way to be seen. It's a way to be seen where in a society you're not held as important, other than the fact that you do some jobs that other people don't want to do. Right? And even then, it's not always celebrated. I feel like we just have or at least for me, have my parents that are working these jobs that are killing them.
Yeah, that's a big deal. So just coming from the construction industry, I have a current friend of mine and an old co-worker. His name's Gilberto, and he's in his 50s, and he essentially...
He's in his 50s?
Yeah.
Shit, dude, he's not aging well.
No, he's actually not even turned 50 yet.
Wow. He looks so tired.
Because he is. So his story kind of goes, he literally ran across the border. He told me the story. He ran for essentially 8 hours straight, just running. And a lot of people don't make it. There's so many deaths. So he runs over here, and essentially his whole mission has been, and he just got his citizenship last year. It was like a really big deal when he got it. I could tell he was proud. He came with a suit, and it really warmed my heart, but it also made me so upset that he's been in this country for over 20 years and it's taken this long. He doesn't have anybody else here. He got really sick during COVID, and Adrian, I literally had to go knocking on doors, and thank God she was with me, because I, again, am struggling with learning Spanish, and it has nothing to do with Spanish not being a beautiful language. I'm just having my own struggles with it. But Adria was with me. We were able to navigate the hospital that he was in. And he's literally just worked here so that he can pay for his house in Mexico and then go back to Mexico. But he's been here for so long. He was so proud to become a citizen. And he's worked to this point now where working is so ingrained in his being, he doesn't know how to sit still. If he's not, he's got a 9 to 5, and then he's got side gigs, and then he's got weekend gigs. And they're all construction. And he's been sick almost on his deathbed twice now. And he still doesn't know how to sit still. And he always says to me, I'm trying to learn how to be less angry. He suffered a lot of abuse at the hands of his father when he was really young. So he has the self-awareness now to be like, I need to stay busy, because otherwise if my mind runs, I get very angry, because he doesn't have the bandwidth to deal with it in a therapy setting. And it's like watching a middle-aged Mexican man who's progressed in America as far as he's gone, and the only value that he has for himself, I can tell, is how hard he works.
And I feel, right, we've put a name to it, machismo, in the Latino community, but it's also generational trauma. Like, all of that anger that our family members who are men carry is a result of how they were treated by the men in their family, is a result of the men, how those people were treated, and the main value that they can find in themselves and how sad it is in their work, is in how hard they work and what they can provide for their family, because that is what it is to be a true man, to have some self-worth, versus finding joys in life to whatever it is.
Here's the fucked up part about it. He doesn't have a family. He's just working this hard because he doesn't know how else to be. He told me he loved to swim. He said it's one of his things that he grew up loving to do the most. He lives 30 miles away from the beach. He hasn't been to the beach, he told me, in 11 years.
Yeah, I have a really complex past. I look at your dad, and he's like the dad I wish I had. I had Sam, and I'm really thankful for that. But your dad is like the epitome of put your head down. Even when we're at family gatherings, he's not super vocal, and he's actually like a really emotional and empathetic human being.
He is so emotionally intelligent.
He is so much what I would describe as like a stoic kind of pillar, but once you just like peel back just even a little bit, his emotions really come through. And I see this as like a memory and a little bit as a nod to the author, because the way she wrote this, I feel like I'm there. Because although my relationship with my dad was complex, in the chapter that you're talking about, she says, my papa, his thick hands and thick shoes, who wakes up tired in the dark, who combs his hair with water, drinks his coffee, and is gone before we wake, today is sitting on my bed. I can see it, I can smell it, I can feel the texture of his hair. I can hear the rustling in the kitchen as they're getting ready to go to work. Like, I have really distinct sensory memories of my dad getting up at 4 a.m. to go to work. And I've seen that. I've seen, like, just even describing him combing his hair with his water. And I know that you felt that as well. And it's a nod to the author's feminine touch of the male experience that we don't really get a lot of insight into, because they have suffered a lot, and they've suffered really in silence. And we can blame them a lot for the shit that they've done to us, because they have done a lot of shit to us. But also they've had their own very unique struggles. Machismo does not benefit men, and it does not benefit women, because it doesn't allow them to feel their emotions, speak about it, and really open up about the things that have hurt them. And I'm sure that all of the men in our lives have had people say fucked up shit to them, and they just have to swallow it. And that is a lot of where that anger comes from, is the injustice that they see, and how they have to humble themselves to not rock the boat, because they are here to work hard and to provide for their families.
Yeah, and it's really tough too that a lot of that judgment oftentimes comes from your own family.
Yeah.
Which is tough. It's tough to work through. It's tough to keep your head down, just work, provide for your kids, when there's so much trauma that you're trying to navigate, not only because of your parents and their parents, but within your own family.
That's gotta be really hard.
Yeah. So I just wanted to include that, for us to touch base with that.
I think that's a really good one because, like I said, her dad is just, I love him so much. And even if I were to tell him that, he would just be like, okay.
He can't receive it.
He can't receive it like that.
Yeah.
Maybe from you guys because you guys get to see him like that, but there will always be like a boundary, you know?
Well,
and he's one of the few people that I feel has appropriate boundaries.
Yes. And also, I feel like my father, I know, of course, this machismo exists with his kids. It has shown up. He very much so has had to grow. He didn't have any parents, so he grew up and his father was already passed away by the time he was born.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah.
His mother, so my grandmother, passed away when he was like 13. So it was just him. And he's the youngest of all, maybe it was like 5 or 6 of them. Eight. Oh wow, okay. That's good. But yeah.
So my mom is the oldest.
And my dad is the youngest. And I feel, in a sense, maybe it's like a whole other generation. If there's 8 of them, there's so many of them that you gotta go through another generation. Yeah.
My mom was at the hospital when our grandma passed.
Yeah.
And it was just, they were completely, it's like Sam and myself. They were just completely living different.
Yeah.
They were in different stages of their life.
Yes. And I think that my dad, I don't know where he has picked this skill up of being so emotionally intelligent, but he has been able to really understand what he went through, his trauma, and really done the best he can to avoid that happening to us. So while it might not have been the best way, and while he still has his struggles and the same thing that a lot of Mexican families go through, he has very much so been the person to be the first to cry. And maybe it's not even because he's, I'm going to show others that it's okay to cry. It's because he just cries. He can't hold it because of all of the trauma that he held. He just can't. His character is so lovely. And for that, I feel like others might judge him. And because they feel intimidated, like just as much as we're talking about race relations and just like how other people judge other races because they're intimidated or they feel uncomfortable. Other people in our family judge him because they feel uncomfortable of his emotional intelligence, his ability to go through that, his vulnerability.
Yes.
Yeah.
His vulnerability makes them uncomfortable, and I see that. I definitely see that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think my mom, unfortunately, is more a product of bending to other people's will. It's not that she doesn't want to stand up for it, it's that she doesn't want to rock the boat because she was the oldest and had to put on a strong face.
Yeah.
And she was, I don't know if you know this, she was there when our grandpa was murdered.
No.
She saw him get murdered.
Yeah. We're sharing our story, but there's a lot that goes into just the Mexican experience. And I don't know if in this book, if Sandra ever touches if the character is a child of immigrants, right? I don't know if that's ever touched on. I would think so.
I'm assuming yes, in Chicago. So, I'm assuming.
There's
I
definitely
don't think she outright says it. I think it's just...
Similarly, I think Sam has taken that role in your family.
Yeah,
like
and it's taken him years. It's really taken him personal trauma and therapy and his love for his kids has been a big part of it in allowing him to be more vulnerable. But even then, it's not as much as my uncle.
Right. Yeah. What would your life have been if he wouldn't have had that emotional intelligence, or if Sam wouldn't have done that work on himself? Because they're very important people in your lives. So if they wouldn't have had the growth that they had and within the means that they got it, what would that have meant to your own experiences? Because they set the pace a little bit.
I feel like, let me think on it real quick.
I would say, who would I be if my mom had not been the empathetic, her empathy and her emotional intelligence?
I'm specifically asking about Sam.
Oh, okay. Oh, it's hard because I feel like I patchworked my experience off of a little bit of everyone. So both my sister, who was a really strong female presence, where my mom wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
And then in her later years, my mom became more of a powerful person, in my view.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know who I would be. That's really hard to answer. They gave me a lot of freedom to live my experience and to develop my own personality. And although they had, again, just like any family has their own toxic traits to try to call me difficult or whatever, they also really encouraged me. So I don't know who I would be. That's a hard one to answer. I guess that's my non-answer.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course there's like a lot of trauma there, but for me, there would be very much so a lack of leaning into whatever emotion comes up in that moment, right? While I also had that experience of being called difficult and all of that, whenever there was any question to what they were doing,
Mm-hmm.
whenever it comes to any struggles for myself, I feel like if I didn't grow up with a father who is and it's not saying that he's like the most emotionally intelligent person, but in comparison to other people in our family or just in general to what machismo like is, I would really also be accepting of that behavior. Yeah. And while he didn't specifically, no, actually he did specifically say, I've grown up, while he really acted in some ways that fell with the machismo behavior, he did not want that for his kids.
Mm-hmm.
So I've grown up in any relation that I've been in and really being like, treat each other kindly,
Mm-hmm.
right? And really having a sense of self-worth there. And I feel like that is something that is not often said to their kids, because at the same time, my father has been able to take ownership for the things that he's done, because in telling his daughter, make sure that someone treats you kindly, he knows that he didn't treat his partner
Mm-hmm.
kindly.
Yeah.
He knows
They
that.
went through really difficult times.
And in that, he's able to give that advice to his kids, knowing that he could be called out for that. So I feel like he has done some work in that end that I feel like I would have fallen into a situation where I would allow myself to be treated in ways that weren't the best for me if my father did not put that emotionally intelligent aspect of his life.
Yeah.
Fucking big ups to Polo. He did great. And I haven't met him, but I've met Sam. And the reason why I bring up Sam so much is because Adria really does identify him as being like a strong father figure in her life. But I think that it's almost laid the groundwork for you, even though who could say what would have happened, but having an emotionally intelligent parent lays so much groundwork, or an emotionally intelligent influence, like I feel like Sam is.
Mm-hmm.
Just being able to acknowledge your faults is so much groundwork in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
And that shows all the rest of us, hey, it gives us validation as people who experience maybe the other end of their mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And then it also lays the groundwork for you to be like, okay, this is what emotional intelligence look like. This is how I treat people within the family that I care about or the friendships that I care about. This is the standard.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always known Andrea to be like super emotionally intelligent. Every conversation we've ever had, you've had a really big handle on your feelings, how you're processing them, who you're going to source processing them with, the appropriate place to place them. And I know that's probably all intentional and probably all a result of influences in some way, but it seems like a lot of his, because I can tell that you get emotional just talking about him. So I can tell that he's had a really strong spotlight on your experience just in life.
I want to piggyback on that a little bit, because recently we got together for my birthday, but it really it was the catalyst for Andrea creating group messages within, which we've had the capability to do, but even within my family, like my direct brother or sister, we haven't really made it a point to get together as a family. And it was really her that created this way for us to start to hang out with each other. Mm-hmm. And just a couple weekends ago, we had her parents, my mom, my brother, my sister, their kids, her siblings all get together and go to this restaurant and just have a fucking great time, to the point that the waitresses were like, so what are you guys celebrating? Because everyone was just like literally having the best time, taking pictures, drinking, eating good food. Everyone was trying each other's food, and it was just like a really fun time. They were like, what are you celebrating? We're like, just getting together.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think a big drive of me really doing that is I love my father so much, and I know the sacrifices that he's done, and also I understand his positionality or his position in being the outsider in his family, because that's really what it is. The fact that he is able to be so vulnerable with himself and crying, right? You hear about in this book they talked about this. She was not able to see her father cry until that point where his brother passed away, or his grandfather, I don't know who passed away.
It was his
my
dad.
whole
It was his
life,
dad.
yeah. And my whole life, my father has cried in front of me, no matter what. And I
That's
feel
a
like,
gift.
And I feel like I understand that he was an outsider in his own family for being that way, but then also as being the youngest and being an orphan, and really wanting to bring some joy back into
because
being alone.
My mom had left.
Everyone had left. He went to go live with his grandparents.
Yeah.
And really wanting to bring, of course, for myself, I want to spend more time with my cousins and stuff. But if I really think about the root of it, is having a family and putting together a family that gets together, and something that he didn't grow up with as a kid.
That's not always the story that any of us experience with dads in general, so that's awesome. He sounds like an awesome guy. I love Sam to death. I think Sam's also a really positive influence at this point in his life, at least. I didn't know him when he was younger, but I think he's an awesome guy. And before we lead our listeners on for 3.5 hours, we'll go ahead and wrap it up right now. Andrea, thank you so much. I know we hang out on personal levels and stuff, but to be able to give your time and to talk about really important subjects for people to just, I think, relate to is like the biggest thing. I don't think that there's enough Hispanic / specifically Mexican content, because Adrian and I have talked about it, and I do tend to go over the Hispanic apparatus, but I think that there's a lot of Mexican-specific content that needs to get out there, and that's what I really loved about this book, is that it was a specific window into a Mexican experience, and it's not here to educate white people, but it is, I think, ultimately a great thing for people to be able to relate to it when you don't see it out in American society. It's not being talked about. It's a disservice to everyone, but especially to the both of you and people like you.
Yeah. From me to you as one of the co-hosts of this podcast and as your cousin, I love you so much. I'm so proud of the woman, because Andrea is about 8 years younger than me. So I'm so proud of the woman that you are, how much of an advocate you are for yourself, for mental health, for your family, how much you bring our family together, how much value you add anytime that you're around. So proud to call you family. I'm so happy that you're here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is so much fun. I was nervous because I was like, I'm not a big reader, honestly. I'm an avid book buyer, but do I read that many books? No, I'm very much...
I relate.
Yeah, I buy a lot of books, don't read a lot of them. But this book was such an easy read because of its structure, but also because of how I was able to relate to it.
I did enjoy the structure once I had the physical copy.
Yeah, so definitely go out there and read it.
Yeah.
It was awesome.
It makes no fucking sense that it's banned, but I'm so glad that we've got to read it as a banned book.
Yeah, it's bullshit that it's banned. There's absolutely no reason. The only reason why this is banned, the only way that I can deduce that it was banned, the only justifiable reason, and it's not even justifiable, is just that Caucasian families are just afraid of diversity.
Yeah.
And that's what it all comes down to. For me, every single book that we've read, we're afraid of teaching our kids critical thinking, we're afraid of diversity, we're afraid of acknowledging those things to normalize them. And so for anybody out there who resonates with Andrea's story, Adri's story, I don't have much stake in this one. We're going to have more content like this. It's going to come from people who live the experience, like Adri, like Andrea. And so please give us suggestions, things that might be banned. We're not exclusive to books either. Like going forward in the podcast, I would like to read news articles, like any like blogs that might be pertinent to people's experience, things like that are banned or having conflicts out there that need to be talked about more. Let's start talking about it.
And also too, I feel like just be okay with being uncomfortable.
Yeah, 100%.
I think that's the main reason why then like that trend of like just like white families not or even schools banning these books. It's because you're so afraid to sit in your own discomfort. But what have you been doing to people of color? They're so uncomfortable in this space. So allow yourself to be uncomfortable.
That's fantastic advice. Go ahead.
Just to wrap up and continue to close, we had picked a book for the next round that we were going to talk about. But today is Sunday, October 15th, and we are searching for a new book because we want to highlight everything that's happening in Palestine, in the Strip of Gaza, and with the Israeli government. We won't obviously go too deep into it because we've helped you guys long enough, and we're so thankful that you're here if you're still here and listening. But I do want to say that our support for the people of Palestine does not mean that we are supporting Hamas. Our denouncement of what the Israeli government is doing is not anti-Semitism and non-support for Jewish communities. I believe that, at least for myself, I'll speak for myself and not for Andrea and not for Jeanna, but at least for me, I think that all eyes are on what's happening right now in Palestine, in Israel, and I'm taking note for myself of who is in support of the genocide and the Israeli government really just doing the full ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people. And again, standing in support with the Palestinians does not mean aligning myself with the terrorist group of Hamas.
Yeah, and we're going to find the right piece to talk about that goes on par with the podcast. And we're going to really dig into this because it's a bigger issue than just a couple of seconds. But thank you so much for listening. Please join us for our next book. Thank you so much for the people that are supporting us and are listening to us. And no matter where you are, no matter who you are or how you feel, just know that we love you.
And that brings us to the end of another episode. If you found this discussion insightful and thought-provoking, don't forget to show your support. You can find all the links and references mentioned in today's episode in the description down below. Whether you're looking for articles, books, or additional resources to explore, we've got you covered.
And if you haven't already, make sure that you hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode. Your support means the world to us. It's the best way to stay connected and engaged. It gets our books out there into the places where maybe they might not be reachable because they are banned.
And if you're really passionate about what we're doing and you want to take your support to the next level, please consider becoming a patron on our Patreon page.
You'll be gaining access to exclusive bonus content, which I don't post to the regular platforms. And you'll even have the opportunity to vote for the next book that we read and suggestions for topics and future episodes. Thanks again for tuning into the Band Together podcast. You can follow us on TikTok. Your feedback and involvement make this podcast possible. So keep reading between the lines.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks a lot.